That is so valuable in the early stages of a startup, to have somebody who's thinking outside the box, who's constantly exploring new ideas. As the business is getting more mature, as it's getting to more of a scale-up phase or maximizing its value phase, having a leader who's constantly throwing out hyper-creative, out-of-the-box ideas and leading the company as if it's like still in that earliest stage, that's tough on the business.
Hey everybody, I'm Blake from Allsmith, and you're watching After the Exit. It's the show where I interview CEOs after they've sold their startup and have them share the lessons that they've learned in blood about business, about relationships, and life. And look, you can learn a couple tips from how they built it, but the real wisdom, the moral of the story, comes at the end, after the exit. Today's guest speaker is Jeremy Pryor, who sold his explainer video agency Epipheo in September of 2020. Before starting Epipheo, he was a pastor turned entrepreneur, looking to integrate his faith, his family, and his business all together. Epipheo was his third try at building a company. It started with a viral explainer video that Jeremy's friend made in Christmas 2008. It was the first of its kind, so they decided to capitalize on the hype and build a brand around it. This led to them capturing their first customer, Google Wave. This resulted in hundreds of leads coming in. They kept growing to around 700 leads per month, and then competition set in. They decided to brand themselves as the premium explainer video company, pushing them upstream from mostly startups to mostly large companies. As the business grew, one of the co-founders went on and started the Bible Project, and around that time, Jeremy came back as CEO for 4 years. He stepped down about a year ago and brought in the former director of ops in as the CEO to prep the company for sale. They just closed on a sale to him and the director of design in September 2020 for an undisclosed amount. After the Exit is brought to you by Visible.vc. Raise capital, update investors, and engage your team from a single platform. It's also brought to you by Boilerplate.legal, affordable, streamlined, venture capital approved legal documents for your startup. Well, thanks for doing this.
Yeah,
I'm really
absolutely.
excited to have you. As a reminder, and especially since this will be the first one to air, the reason that we're doing this is I believe there's some certain type of insight that you can gain at the end of a story, right? Yeah. If you're halfway through the book and you're like, oh, the moral of the story is this, it doesn't make as much sense, right? And what I found is that most startup content and most business content is coming from people in the middle of the book, right? How I built this is a good example. It's typically done by the CEO, who's still CEO, doing PR for the company, talking about everything they learned. And it's not that you can't get lessons from that, but they're just not as deep as opposed to at the end when you get the moral of the story, you get the most insight after the exit. So that's what I've done. We're doing 10 of these conversations. And so I'm really excited. I've reviewed your list. I'm really geeked about some of these. So thank you again for putting this together, doing the work before this.
Yeah,
one caveat for you and for anybody here is I have 5 children and we're in my home right now. So if you hear bumping, screaming noises, tackling noises, that's pretty normal in this house. And it's authentically the experience of being in the Smith household. So just prepare yourself for that as well.
Yeah.
So cool. All right, let's just jump right into it then. Okay, cool. Lesson number 1 on your list. You said that I'm built only for the bootstrap startup. I want freedom more than money or prestige. So no VCs. Yeah, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to know what you want as an entrepreneur. And a lot of times you're sort of in a culture or ecosphere where everyone's doing the same thing. For me, one of the big reasons why I wanted to start a business was to get freedom. Like I really wanted to explore what it was like to work on my own. And so that having that tension of all of a sudden having lots of bosses, having to report to investors, that kind of stress really would have ruined my experience as a business owner. I have a ton of respect for people that do that. When you were going through that, I was with you and cheering you on. I know for me that would have really probably broke something in me, or really soured a lot of my experience. So but I was very comfortable with the bootstrap, like constantly thinking about the runway, constantly figuring out ways to live on the profit, making sure that the business was basically all sweat equity until it started making money. Every company that we've started was sort of in that vein. And so I'm super comfortable with that. I enjoy that challenge. But it doesn't. There's some prestige that comes from raising money, being able to scale up faster that you lose out on when you're doing that. But it definitely fit both my values and my personality a lot better.
I'm curious, what do you mean by freedom?
Yeah. I think
maybe how did you exercise that personally?
Yeah, I think it's confusing to me when you have investors who own a lot of the company. Whose company is it? And one of the things I wanted to learn is how I would run a company. And I know that as entrepreneurs, you have a certain amount of freedom, and the investors expect you to use that freedom. But for me, that was very confusing. If I make a decision to offer this benefit, but I'm not sure that is in the best interest of the investors, how do I feel about that? How do I work through that? And then how do I manage my own time? Or what if we decide to go this direction, that direction with the company? All of that was sort of confusing to me, and I wanted to primarily make those decisions with an owner's hat on, as opposed to just a pure CEO who's working for a lot of different stakeholders. Now, as things got more complicated, we had more owners, I started to feel that pressure and just realized how hard that was for me, and how that really limited my sense of freedom that I really enjoyed about business, where you get to make decisions and live with the consequences, and owners that have more of a stake kind of get to do that more.
I'm interested, so you talk about I want freedom more than money or prestige. I guess, did you feel like part of the price that you have to pay for that freedom is, one is slow growth, but the other is the ability to hire other people also?
Right. Yeah, sure. I think probably the biggest price is, well, first of all, it really limits the kind of business models you can go into. There's so many business models that need investment capital to really get to any place of profitability. And so that's one of the reasons why we really steered towards like service-based businesses, because clients were paying us money immediately for a service we were providing. That allowed us to be a bootstrapped startup, as opposed to if you need to spend a couple of years head down engineering before you come up with a big product. You really need investment money for most of those kinds of business models.
So if you're in a bootstrap, you think most likely it's not just a product focus.
Right.
You have to be thinking about the business model right up front and say, how do we implement this as fast as possible?
Yeah, that became one of the most important decisions, was business models. That we actually decided on the business model before the business. So I had started 2 companies before. One was an inventory-based company, the Tolkien Town, Lord of the Rings collectibles. You need a lot of money to have $500,000 worth of inventory to be able to make money, and we had nothing. And so just trying to get up to that inventory level was so challenging. It took years as a bootstrap, and then we finally did have to take investor money. That the next time we started a business, I knew that I wanted to be a service-based business for that reason alone. So I was only looking to invest in or be a part of, an owner of, service-based company. And so when the opportunity to own a video production studio came to me, it sort of fit the profile, and that was the reason why I was really interested in jumping in.
This is I wanted to go deeper on this one in particular, because I feel like this is a decision that even a lot of early founders don't know they're making this decision. They think, I'm just starting a company. Yeah. And then later on they find out that, I'm actually bootstrapping, or I actually venture backed. And that was my case, actually. Yeah. I think I was just looking at what you'd done and thought, I'm doing the same thing, and then found out, based on the business model I'd done, that it was actually a very different experience. Right. If you were talking to a first-time founder, knowing what you know now, I guess, is there any metrics that, or any kind of heuristic you would use to help them determine whether they should be bootstrapping or are designed for bootstrapping versus going after the venture backing? Yeah,
well, it's all based on the cash flow of the business. So a business where you obviously receive the cash upfront for a service, you can bootstrap really easily. But one in which you have to build something to have something, a minimum viable product, that's most likely going to require some kind of investment. Yeah, so that's a big decision, and I think that it took some self-knowledge. Like, I would not have known 5 years before we started Epipheo that I wanted that was such a big deal to me. But when we did start it, I realized, that's definitely what I'm looking for. And again, it's really a freedom thing. It's what is going to help you sleep at night, what's going to help you have an experience as an entrepreneur that you really enjoy, and so. That's a sort of a self-knowledge thing. And sometimes you just have to go and try and figure this stuff out. That's certainly the way most people do it. But I didn't realize that, that's sort of a pre-decision you can make. Do you want to have investors that are going to be grabbing the equity? Now, there's a lot of the fact is, for service-based companies, usually the exits are much smaller. You can take cash out while you build the company without hurting the company or really undermining the company too badly, as long as you're careful with the distributions. You can exit, but the exits are smaller. And so it just depends on what you're looking for. All those things were totally fine with me. But it so definitely worked out. But it was a decision that you can make in the advanced stages. A lot of people don't realize they're making so early on.
Yes. Brilliant. That's great. I think that's super helpful for people. Cool. Number 2, you said alignment with co-founders is defined largely by agreeing on an exit strategy.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, I think when you are looking for co-founders, oftentimes you're thinking skill set and people that you get along with, and those are super important. But man, it is really hard if you are heading. I mean, literally, when you think about vision or alignment, it's that we're going to yoke with each other, which assumes we're heading the same direction. And so, what a lot of people do is they either don't know what direction they want to head, or their co-founders want to head, or they know in advance we are actually thinking about heading in different directions. And that you can just predict in advance the tension that's going to create. And so I think it's important to have that conversation about exit. Like, are we all comfortable selling this? Do we want to own this for a long time? Do we want the distributions from this business? What are we looking for? Like, what would we all agree? And there was a moment before we got to our exit where all the founders got together and decided, for the first time really in the company's history, the company had been almost around for 12 years, but about a year and a half ago, we all sat down and decided on the same exit strategy. We all agreed, and it was like the most peaceful time I've had as a business owner, because we all knew what we were looking for, we all agreed on the metrics, we all decided when we would sell, and I just felt like, wow, I wish I would have known that conversation just took so much of the stress or misalignment out of the relationships.
Yeah, it's the conversation beneath every other conversation.
Right.
But if you don't address that, you may not even be able to empathize on why someone's behaving in a certain way.
Exactly, yeah. And that's tricky. Again, a lot of it is you don't know what you want. That's the most dangerous person to be or co-founder to partner with. They don't know what they want. I was definitely that person for most of this journey. I mean, it was really hard for me to know what I wanted, because you just haven't been down these roads. Maybe I would want to own this company for a long time. Maybe I would want to run it for a long time. I have much stronger opinions about that now, but I didn't know at the time.
You're an open person, right? You're very high on open. Actually, that's your next point, is you actually say it's almost impossible to know what you want when you're new to this game.
Yes.
So you said you're going to get misaligned because of that.
That's right.
Yeah. Say on that. Talk about that.
Yeah, so and you have to take responsibility for that. And I would say for me, I put a lot of stress in the lives of my co-founders, because I was trying to figure out in real time what I wanted. And I kind of wish that was something that I was more self-aware about. And I would say that was sort of true to varying degrees with the other co-founders, but I would say it was probably strongest with me. I was probably the most confused about what I wanted, most open. Like, literally 1 month I might be like, let's just own this forever, and we'll just buy a ski lodge somewhere and work together with our families. All next month it's like, oh, it's all about the employees, and the next month it's like, well, maybe we should sell this company. So because part of it's just my openness and my confusion about what I wanted, having never experienced any of those exits before. And being willing to entertain any idea, and also being very influenceable in terms of other people's opinions or thoughts, and being able to get caught up in that a lot. And so that really creates a lot of confusion and stress in the ownership group, to have that level of confusion. And as we got closer and closer to exit, I became more and more clear. Like, this is what I want. This is what is best for our family, and that's when alignment and peace really starts to take over.
Is there anything that you can do as a founder to speed up that knowing what you want?
Well, I think knowing that is going to interject a lot of stress, and so you need to talk about it in a very self-aware fashion. So I think that what I would have, like the way that when I wasn't self-aware of how that was changing, or what a big deal that was to not know what you want. To me, I could get really passionate about an idea, like, we should think about this, and really put a lot of stress on my co-founders and on the company to figure this out, and not realizing that I am working out what I want, And had I signaled that and said, hey guys, like I'm still trying to figure out what I want from this, and I am really wrestling with this idea, I think that would have helped a lot. I think that still makes you a pretty stressful person to try to align with, but I think that's the next best thing. If you don't know what you want, talk about the fact that you don't know what you want. Like talk to people who have been through exits and have a lot more experience than you about what those different opportunities are, and really make that a top priority to really get down to, this is what I really believe, this is what I want. And if you're really wrestling with it and constantly playing with those ideas, then take responsibility for, this is going to be stressful on you guys. I'm sorry. Like I am trying to figure it out.
Yeah, so much of it is, I think, exposing yourself to other stories, whether it's through
helps a lot.
content or just through spending time with other people who have different narratives.
Mm-hmm.
I think you start, at least for me, I kind of sense to feel what I want as opposed to like decide. It's like, okay, this resonates.
Right, that's a hard process. A lot of times you discover those intuitions in the moment, when you've tried something. So you read, and this is one of the problems is you read books and you get kind of like geeked out. I remember probably one of the books that influenced me the most was Tony Hsieh's book, Delivering Happiness.
Oh my
it's like one of the most idealistic business books on the planet, and it's like, maybe he's figured it out. Maybe this is really what you should do, is just own a company and like move into trailers together and like create a community.
Like a mall?
Yeah.
Remember, like they all lived in the mall. They had a dance floor on the top floor. Yeah.
Yeah. So many different iterations, and there's a beautiful story there. But that's part of the problem, is that the spectrum is, you've got, maybe people that you don't respect who are all about the money, and could care less about the people, to people that are just using their business as a social experiment and are trying to figure out a new way to do life. And if you're open, you might swing back and forth between these massive extremes, because it's like, who's to say, which is better? And that was really hard for me, and I think that therefore difficult on my co-founders and on the business.
This is a theme that's come up in other interviews I've done, of knowing what you want, and that being a power of a leader, is to know what they want.
Yeah, that is powerful.
That's excellent. Number 4, you said be brutally honest about how much value you add in the different phases of the business, the different business years. So you said startup phase, scale-up phase, value maximization phase, and you found that you add value in decreasing amounts, and that most entrepreneurs are not built for a red ocean.
Right.
There's a lot packed into that. Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, a part of what I didn't know, this is another one of those things that you don't know until you try. I love the startup phase. The way I'm wired, you can hear this about the level of openness. I'm constantly looking for a creative solution. That is so valuable in the early stages of a startup, to have somebody who's thinking outside the box, who's constantly exploring new ideas. As the business is getting more mature, as it's getting to more of a scale-up phase or maximizing its value phase, having a leader who's constantly throwing out hyper-creative, out-of-the-box ideas and leading the company as if it's like still in that earliest stage, that's tough on the business. And so for me, that was always my intuition, always my instinct, no matter what stage the business. I could never get myself to just buckle down and say, I want to just lead a really efficient company. Like, I'm not really well wired for that. There are people that are so much better at that. So it's just the reality that I add a lot more value there. And I think if you're looking at people like, you're idolizing the Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, guys who started businesses, scaled up businesses, and are managing businesses, that really confused me. Because I was like, oh, well, this unicorn of a person exists. This person who is great for the startup phase, great for the scale-up phase, great ongoing as the company is growing. And I do think those people exist, but this is what I mean by being brutally honest. I am not like that. I am way better at the startup phase. I add a ton more value. And so my biggest challenge is going to be to hand off leadership at the appropriate time. To look for, and what's really hard is sometimes there's a gap between where your value starts to diminish and when you can actually afford the kind of person who could sweep in and like take the company into the next stage. And that's been an area that you do have to sometimes work on some weaknesses to get through that uncanny valley, to make sure that you're not dropping the business and moving on to another shiny object when the value is still there, and you got to do a good handoff. What happened in our company is, if you guys are familiar with the blue ocean, red ocean kind of terminology, blue oceans are when you created a business model where there's virtually no competitors because you've essentially redefined a niche within an industry. And so if you want that thing, you're going to go to that company. Epipheo was a total blue ocean company that after about 3 or 4 years became a red ocean company to a thick red ocean company.
You guys essentially invented the explainer video and were the brand for that for a while.
Yeah. And so once it just literally hundreds of competitors flooded into the market, which totally makes sense. And there was only a handful when we started, and nobody was really scaling up in that product area. So we were just enjoying blue ocean for years until that happened. And man, it takes a different skill set to manage a red ocean company, because so much of what you want to do is become very efficient, worry about price. So every time you throw in a giant new creative idea in a company that is in a red ocean, you're really threatening the survival of that business because you're fighting for your life at that point. And competitors are like trying to eke out little efficiencies to try to beat you on price or whatever, beat you on service. And man, those intuitions that I had as more of a startup person, they just weren't well tuned for red oceans. And I needed to have people in leadership that saw that, understood that stage of the company. And for me, just being brutally honest about like, okay, I really wanted to learn how to manage a red ocean company. And like I said, I had people that I kind of looked up to, models that I was like, oh, they did both. And I think you can make those transitions, but I think that's why I like the phrase of where do you add the most value? And so, yes, I could probably go to business school and really figure it out, but it's like I'm working like 80% of my time in my areas of weakness. And man, why would you want to do that?
It's so hard. I guess, how do you get to the point of hopelessness that maybe I just need to level up?
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. Like I feel I didn't do a lot of negotiating because we were a consumer business. And so in our exit process, I did some negotiating, and I just felt totally inept. And I said the other day, like, I don't think I'm a negotiator. And my friend challenged me and said, well, maybe you just haven't much and you'll do better the next time. How do you figure out what's just novelty and what's just like, I'm out of my strength?
Yeah, well, I think that's where like things like Strength Finders really helps, because if you pair your strengths and the actual what's required of the job is like in your areas of weakness, that should signal something to you. Like, it's not that you can't learn, but the bigger question is why would you operate for years in an area of your weakness when you have these superpowers that could be activated and adding value like crazy in other areas? But so much of that just has to do with like, you see what's in front of you. These are the opportunities to run this company that I started. I have equity in this company. Why wouldn't I want to maximize that equity? Things like that. So because you see what's in front of you, but you don't see what's not in front of you, the opportunities that might be there that fit your actual skill set. And that's been a real challenge for me in this journey, is because I value learning so much. So I actually have no problem putting myself in an area that I'm very weak, being totally responsible and just having to figure out how to swim. Like, I enjoy that process. That actually blesses me a lot. I enjoy it, and it's good for me. It's good for my long-term success. It wasn't great for the business. Like if you, and this again goes back to kind of the investor like freedom. Like, you might have the freedom to do that if you own the company, but you have to be really careful to make the company basically send you to business school on its own dime. When you have investors or other stakeholders that really need to make sure that this is done in the best way possible. And a lot of that for me was I wasn't aware of, okay, these are areas that I don't think I can level up enough. I can get to like a 5 or a 6, if I really try hard and I'm constantly working out of my weaknesses and just really compensating. But there are people out there that just naturally walk in this area 8, 9, 10. Why shouldn't they be more in charge at this point.
And that's thinking of the business more as an owner as opposed to thinking of it just as the CEO.
Right.
That's great. This is one of my favorite ones. Number 5, lofty values are a privilege of high performance.
Yes.
This is like, I starred this one. Talk about this some.
Yeah. So a lot of times when you're doing really well as a company, you're like, wow, like we figured it out. Like we're something special. And so you begin to sort of indulge all your idealism about business in general, maybe economics, justice, like every area. Like we're treating employees right. We know how to treat customers. A lot of that is coming from the excess capital that is coming from high performance. So this is what happened in our blue to red ocean phase. We were hyper idealistic and we had very lofty values that everyone in the company believed in. We had the money literally to indulge in all of those things. When the red ocean came, when the competitors came, we had to cut price and we had to really think about margin and really start to become an efficient machine. So many of those lofty values got challenged. And if you were to ask me, I'd be like, no, those are just things we believe. We're going to take hits for those things. Those are universal values that we care about. They matter a lot. But man, business in a red ocean is all about trade-offs. And those people you can value some things, but man, if you try to value everything and you're in a red ocean, you're going to get crushed, and rightfully so. And it was very difficult for me to understand the difference. Trying to value everything at once is really is I think a privilege of having a high performance season, a time where you're just maybe because of a blue ocean opportunity, you've got huge margins, and you can convince yourself and the company that no, it's just we're special and we just are believing all the right things. But man, it's because your success at that moment is really funding that idealism. And once the funding starts to run out, then you have to make hard trade-offs. And man, if you convince the entire company that this is not about our performance, but this is just because we just have figured things out and we believe such amazing things, and then you start to have to make those hard trade-offs, you're going to pay with interest for that mistake. We definitely did.
Yeah, you say that in the next was that an idealistic mission, vision, and values can badly backfire.
That's right.
In the entitlement culture specifically.
Yeah.
Talk about the entitlement culture and how that plays in.
Yeah, so you could create within your company an entitlement culture through lofty values. And the culture in general.
What do you mean by that, entitlement culture?
Just to say, like one of the things we did was we're going to pay for all your lunches, 5 days a week, right? Why? Well, because we're so generous. We did that.
We believe in caring for the whole person.
Yeah.
And health.
You talk like that. You talk as if it's stemming from values as opposed to excess capital or excess cash flow. And so so we did that a lot. We were really awash in excess cash flow for a couple of years because we were in that blue ocean opportunity. And so we created an entitlement culture and we fed it. And we
literally
undergird it. Yes, literally we fed it. We undergirded it with all these ideas, and then when hard trade-offs started to need to be made, then you're going to pay for those decisions. The other thing that honestly has been really challenging is there's not just an entitlement culture you can create within a business, but there can be an entitlement culture in the larger culture that starts to seep into your business, where your employees don't have any conception that these trade-offs really are going to affect them and affect the company's performance. That's I think one of the most challenging. I found the most challenging element for sure being CEO of a company was being able to communicate the trade-offs that we were really having to make. And having employees just say, no, this is not about trade-offs. This is just justice. Like in France, they get a lot more vacation, or like whatever. They're reading articles just constantly coming out that are saying we ought to do it this way, and a good company does this, and this is one of the best places to work in the city, and this is what they're doing. And some giant corporation that has huge amount of that excess capital, they have all of these benefits. Why don't we have them? It's clearly because you're selfish.
Yes.
And you're a worse person.
Yes.
That was so hard for me.
It's lonely, actually. Yeah. It's very lonely when you start to realize that you're the dad.
Right.
right?
Yes.
And they're like, why does my friend's dad give him a pony?
Right.
Why don't I have a pony?
Right.
Shouldn't we all have ponies?
Yes, and it's clearly because you're just like, so those kind
their
of
family
judgments,
is making more money
That's
now,
right.
so they get ponies.
And so you have to talk like that. And I think some people can handle that transition, and you can make those cases and show people, actual realities and real trade-offs that you're having to make as a company. And then you're just sort of relying on people's logic and their ability to empathize or want to empathize with the trade-offs you're trying to make. Yes. And I would say that if you've really pumped up that entitlement culture, people will have a much harder time empathizing with those real trade-offs.
Or just even framed these as values as opposed to perks.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you framed it as a value,
yes.
It energizes people.
Yes.
And that's the thing. I found that values are great for energizing people.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
you just can't have too many values. If you have too many values, you will have to back off.
The energy is coming from somewhere, and
yes.
a lot of it where it's coming from is we are collectively judging worse companies. We're saying, well, look at those greedy people over there who don't care for their employees. We're doing this. So if you were just if you were valuing something that every other company values, then of course nobody cares. But it's really when you value something that other companies don't value, that it's distinctive to your culture, your company, that people start to feel like we're a special place. And so that's where the energy is coming from. It's the idealism, the excitement that maybe we figured something out. We are special, and you can't have too many of those. Like if you start sprinkling those or using those inappropriately, and if those require a lot of funding to really back them up, then it's really your own fault. I would say a lot of what I'm describing is not something I'm like saying, it was our employees' fault. I think it was my fault or our fault in a lot of cases. Again, trade-offs I don't think I was realizing we were making. A lot of it came from inexperience, not knowing like, oh, this is because we're being generous in a stage in which the company can be generous. I wish I had this foresight to say to people, guys, we're having an amazing year, and so we are going to be really generous. Here's some big bonuses or things that we're going to do that are kind of, it won't always be this way. If we have a really hard year, we're going to have to make hard trade-offs. Instead of saying, no, here are values, here's all the funding behind them, and now they're cemented parts of our culture.
Yes.
You can expect these going forward. That's when it gets dangerous.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I've never experienced loneliness in the same way as when you realize that you're the only one holding the trade-offs at the time, or it feels like you're the only one holding the trade-offs.
Yeah.
It's a very isolating experience.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. All right. So then switching in, you say the profit first mentality works if your family has a great vision for stewarding the resources. I'm really curious about this. This is the first time you brought up family, but then that family is going to be a couple points throughout here. So talk about that.
Yeah. So I think that one question that everyone should be asking when they're owning a company. So owning means something. It means that we have equity in this company, and it means that we are expecting a return. Who's the we, right? And sometimes you can become completely, as an individual, fused with your company. And so you don't really care maybe about the return or the profit that the company's making that's really supposed to accrue to you and your family. That's really, I think that's really dangerous. I think that as a entrepreneur, you need to have two different hats, and you need to be able to distinguish between them. You need to say, I'm trying to start this company. I care about this company. I love what we're trying to do. I'm going to serve our customers. But I'm also the head of a family, right? If you have a family, if you're married, it's easier to think this way. I think if you're not married, you should think this way. You should say, okay, separate yourself, as an individual from what's going on in the business.
Yes, you have Self-Co.
That's right.
And then you have the company over
Exactly.
here. And Self-Co works or shares time.
That's right.
For this, yes.
Yes. And so, because if Self-Co or your family co doesn't have a vision for how to steward those resources other than just let's get a bigger house, let's get a nicer car, then it becomes really hard to figure out, why would I ever extract money from this company? Like, I just believe in this, and you put too many of your chips in. I think that's what I'm describing. And so the only way to resist that is to actually begin to create a vision for your own family's use of resources, so that you can begin to see that trade-off. When we decided, instead of distributing that $200,000, we reinvest in the company, that meant my family is not going to own that asset. that rental property. We're not going to be able to invest in the stock market in the way we wanted to. We're not going to be able to grow our portfolio of assets. Now, if your mentality is, well, we're going for a big exit, that's the reason, and this is in the best interest of both the business and my family, great. Like if those are perfectly aligned, that's fine. Oftentimes they're not, and in our case, there was a lot of tension between what was best for my family and what was best for the business, and that was really challenging to manage.
It seems pretty easy to manage internally. It gets really complex when you have employees who maybe don't participate in that distribution on the family side, right?
Yes.
So it's like it's either going to help my team or it's not going to help my team. It's going to help some other team over here.
Yeah.
How'd you navigate that?
Yeah, well, that's the tension where when you're thinking about so for me, it started with as a owner of the company, am I comfortable with the fact that the company is making contracts with employees based on basically fair market value for their services, and we are trying to, as much as we can, be on the generous side of whatever fair market value is, and then after that, the owners have taken the lion's share of the risk, and they've put in the sweat equity to start this thing, and so from a straight up fairness perspective, it's okay for my family to benefit in a disproportionate way on a typical quarter by quarter basis than an employee who's being paid fair market value for their time. That was a really hard thing for me to fully embrace, and I still struggle with it.
Yeah.
Because
you just described capitalism.
Yeah, that's what it is. You basically have leverage because you own it, and you're using that leverage to be able to benefit yourself and your own family. And it shouldn't be at the expense of your employees. I mean, again, this is assuming that you are doing a really good job of taking care of them according to what that looks like in our culture. But you're a competitive business, and what that means is that if you begin to be overly generous, or you de-incentivize investors or de-incentivize owners, there's going to be a trade-off. It could be just further down the road, and it'll be serious, and it will hurt your employees as well. So that's the thing that you have to know the game you're actually playing. And what I think that, and I don't think that changes necessarily depending on whether or not you care or think about your family. That's capitalism. But I'm saying that one of the things that really helps is that when you begin to see a longer term vision over here, that can really start to help you get a lot more stability personally. When things are hard in the business, when you can show, no, we are going to benefit from this ultimately, and we're not completely tied down to, and that happens over time, to the performance of this one entity. Like this is something we've decided to invest a ton in, but this family is going to is going to outlast this entity. So we have to really be thoughtful about how this is supposed to help us. Why are we investing so much in this when we can go and invest in other things? That still needs to make sense for your family, for yourself personally. And a lot of people don't want to ask those questions. They just want to completely hand their life over to their startup. And I think, again, that's appropriate probably in the very early stages. When you have investors, a lot of times investors want to hear you say that. If they see that you have a foot somewhere else, that you have passion elsewhere, that understandably, signals go off that they're like, well, I'm about to throw my hard-earned money into this thing. And so can I trust you? Like, do you have other exits? I want you to be completely identified, totally incentivized. And that's where, going all the way back to the very, very first question you asked, or the first point that I made, that's what it meant by freedom to me. Like that, I never wanted to give myself 100%. That felt really dangerous to my family, to my own identity. And so I knew I was going to always withhold some percentage of myself. And I could understand why an investor wouldn't like that. Yep. And so that's why I felt like I was really struggling with taking investor funds and not giving what they would traditionally expect.
Yeah, so then you said, so you need to be not only have a family vision, but you're also saying be as intentional about building your family as your business. Yeah. So talk about that.
Yeah, because what you're in a business that's having like offsites, you're talking about mission, where are we headed, we have goals, quarterly goals, annual goals. that we're trying to hit, and we see the metrics and they're public, and there's all of these incentives, hundreds of powerful incentives working on you as an owner of the business or as a CEO to really to perform in that role. And if you then turn around and look at your family, it's like for most people, it's literally zero. There's no mission, there's no values, there's no metrics, there's nothing. And it's understandable that if you set that game up in that fashion, that this is going to suffer. And so if you want to perform really, really well as a CEO or as a business owner, and you want to really go for it and have those offsites and have those conversations, get those goals out, hit those goals, then I think you owe it to your family to invest some time in really making concrete those similar goals, in terms of like strength, similar rhythms. Do we have quarterly offsites? Do me and my spouse go off? Do we, with our older kids, with us, do we talk through these things? Because that's otherwise you're designing an imbalanced system.
Yes.
And that's you're going to pay for that, I think, in the future.
Yeah, if you put all of the rewards in one entity, the business,
right,
and none of the rewards in the business side, on the family
clarity,
side. Yes.
Or even identity, in terms of some people are just very internally motivated to succeed. And a lot of times that success needs to be boiled down to specific metrics. Some of the best CEOs are people that once there's a goal, they don't let themselves off the hook, and they're extremely honest about am I hitting it or not. People like that need to have concrete goals on the other side of that equation.
Otherwise, they will just by nature will neglect their family.
That's right. Yeah, and that makes sense. You're setting it up that way.
Yep. So talk about how that relates to Sabbath. You said taking a weekly Sabbath anchors you to the big picture.
Yeah. So there's different rhythms that can pull your identity out of being completely sucked into one thing. For us, one of those things is a weekly Sabbath. So, for almost 20 years, our family has kept 24-hour rest day. And so we kick it off on Friday night with a big meal with our family. Grandparents are there, and we talk about the business, but we talk about it from the perspective of family. Everyone at the Sabbath table is a son or a daughter or father or mother. We're not workers, we're not employees, we're not owners, we're family. And I find those identities so much more powerful. Even when you have a struggling family, they tend to have the longest lasting power over you, right? So people, when you go to counseling, you're talking about your family relationships. You're not constantly talking about work relationships. That's really indicative of the fact that these identities are more deep.
I want to clarify that. You're saying there's more power in this identity of being a husband or a wife, or being a son or a daughter, or being a father or mother. Talk about that. Like what is the outflow of that power?
Well, it's going to be how you ultimately see yourself. You're not going to be able to escape it. It's going to be how
at the end of your life,
that's right,
you'll say, how was I as a son? How was I as a father?
And the people you care about the most will also see it as the most powerful identity in your life, and they're going to evaluate you primarily on how you were as a father, how you were as a son. But in the day-to-day world of work, it doesn't feel that way. It feels totally the opposite. Like my fatherhood, my sonship, those identities are very, very minuscule. Right now, like we're going to get this company going, and we're going to be successful. And so, if you have to know that's going to happen to you, especially when you're in something as intense as a startup. And so you have to decide if you're ever going to pull yourself out of that perspective and get above it. And so for us, we got above it every single week. It wasn't just let's just take a minute and meditate. It was, no, I'm going to have an experience of being a father, a son, and then I'm going to sit in that experience and really think about the big picture for 24 hours. That was a decision we made, and it really has both the power of helping us recover, so that we don't burn out, which is huge, but it also helps us maintain our perspective on the big picture, so that we're not, climbing a ladder that's leaning up against the wrong wall. And those are both really big dangers when you're in a startup, burning out or really pursuing something that's not actually aligned with what you really, really want, what you want to see for your future. And so I would just say I was rescued by the Sabbath over and over and over again.
There's one that's like pulling you from the negative, and the other is on the positive side, which is that when you're working from a deeper identity of your, I mean, we're talking about the locus of identity, which feels like very ethereal, but it's real. And I feel like every interview I've had, somebody brings up something about don't put all of your identity in the title of founder and CEO.
That's right.
And most people are saying that because it could go away or because you'll act weird.
Yes.
But I think what's interesting is you're calling out that there's actually, it's like a springboard, a hidden springboard, that if you put it in these other buckets of father, son, brother, sister, right? Like, you know, all these different relational identities, that you actually have more depth, more power. You resist burnout. As long as you're going back to that well, you actually may have even maybe more confidence and more assertiveness because of that identity, because it's, you know, it's going to last until you die. Yeah,
it's like a negotiation where, you know, you if you have the ability to walk away from the table, you're always going to get a better deal. A lot of people are investing so much in their work identity that they can't walk away from the table, and they're going to get a bad deal. And it's going to be bad emotionally, bad spiritually, bad relationally. And so you need to have, and I believe that it can't be as simple as like, I really want to balance my life. It's got to be rhythmic. You've got to decide what that means on it. Is it a daily? Is it a week? Is it, you know, a month? Is it a year? It's got to be played out in specific rhythms.
And for you, Sabbath isn't a self-care day.
Yeah.
It's a relational reality day.
Yes. It's all of those things. 24 hours is a long time.
Yeah.
And so you can do a lot of self-care in that, but it's not merely that. It's not merely like, I need to, you know, make sure that I'm not burning out. It's that I need to make sure that I'm living through who I really am, and not getting swept up totally in some work identity, which our culture just, it's weird. You know, there are cultures that when we lived a lot of time in the Middle East, and like an Arab culture, for example, you walk into a shop that's owned by an Arab shopkeeper, and they will want to talk about your family and their family. So they're at work, but their primary identity is always, let me tell you about my son and my daughter, and this is what we're doing. It's like, that's the way they talk. In our culture, we have to understand that in our culture, a lot of times we want to pretend like people's families don't even exist when we're at work. That's very unusual, to have a culture that will let you fully inhabit your work identity all the time and won't really challenge that. And so I think this is part of the reason why, man, you need to have some rhythm to pull yourself back into some of these deeper, longer lasting identities. Otherwise, you're going to get completely trapped.
This is great. I think like this is something I haven't heard from anybody else, and so this is incredibly powerful. CEOs exist to make unpopular decisions. Being agreeable is a serious problem.
Yes. Yeah. So one of the big, you know, probably the most scientifically rigorous personality test has this agreeable, disagreeable, innate sort of component to the human personality. And so being agreeable is like when you don't want conflict, when you want to agree with somebody, when you pay a huge emotional price to say no. Like, that's an agreeable person. A disagreeable person can say no, and they pay no emotional price. You know,
they might even get a
pop of
energy.
Yeah, that feels good. Yeah, to say no. So I am very agreeable. And I would say this is probably one of...
Me too.
Yeah.
I agree. I also,
that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we both suffer. There's lots of great things about being an agreeable person, but it's a huge weakness as a CEO or in a leadership role. And so this is another area where you have to be very self-aware. So if you're in a leadership situation and you're a CEO and you've got a great leadership team and, you know, they're managing the company with you, and why do you need to exist? Like, why isn't there just like a decision making where we all get together and we all sort of decide collectively what to do? And so some people think that's what leadership is. But man, in a business, because like we've said, there's so many very difficult trade-offs that the CEO is there to make the hardest decisions. The CEO is there to be the most disagreeable person potentially in the most intense situations. Because what inevitably happens, I saw this happen over and over again, is that the trade-offs they felt too painful for the team to want to make. And so people start to subtly make cases. They don't know, you know, this is really where it's coming from, but they start to subtly make a case that everyone's like, okay, yeah, that feels good. That isn't really best for the business, but it feels good. And And so to walk into that room and say, guys, we can't do that. Like we are going to go this way, and know you're going to pay a big price, and you're an agreeable person. The pressure you'll feel really subconsciously to go along with the group is going to be really, really strong. And so to be aware that, no, my job is to be disagreeable. It's to be disliked. If somebody's got to be disliked, it's going to be me. I'm going to be disliked. We're going to I'm going to make a hard decision, and it's going to hurt. And to understand that there are people out there, when they do that, they don't actually feel much pain. I have a buddy who recently said, he was walking through incredibly hard decisions he was going to make, and he said, Jeremy, I love this. And I was like, dude, that's crazy. I would hate to go through what you just went through. But it's helpful to know that. It's helpful to know that there are disagreeable people, there are agreeable people. And this is another one of those areas where if you decide your skills, your business is starting to enter an area where it's got to maximize value, basically make really hard trade-offs, drive as much profit to the bottom line, create as much efficiency as possible. I hope you're pretty disagreeable, or that you've somehow figured out a way to overcome your agreeableness, because your intuitions will betray you. And I would just say that about myself. Like when I'm doing blue ocean startup stuff, all my intuitions are firing, and my agreeableness does not tend to really cause many problems, because hey, I'm open and I'm figuring stuff out, and it feels good, and it's a team, and there's not huge trade-offs. But man, when we're in hyper efficiency mode as a business, and there are hard trade-offs, and people are going to get fired, and people are going to get hurt, and hard decisions that have to be made, my agreeableness is probably my worst enemy, and I didn't know it. I did not know that was how deeply that was operating in me, and how dangerous that was for the business.
Yep. And I think some of that has to do, the problem is that creative people are often agreeable.
Yes.
Right, and also salespeople are often agreeable. So that early stage agreeableness, you're going to sell all the right people. You're going to bring all these people together around an idea that you've created, often through collaboration, through agreeableness. Yeah. And then at a certain place, suddenly, when it becomes time to pare it down, that disagreeableness is necessary, and to be able to turn up that dial. And for me, I found that dial is tied directly to how much am I thinking independently. Yeah. And so for me, it's typically in those meetings where someone is trying to persuade me, I'll just say, I'm not going to make the decision right now. I say, I need to go away, and I'm going to go right. Yeah. And typically if I can write or run, or both. Yes. For me, that was when I could say, okay, now what do I really think? And then I kind of muster up the courage to then come in and be disagreeable. Yeah, man, that's hard. But you have to have some sort of, did you find any other hacks like that?
Well, one of the things you described was getting everybody together. If you feel really good at that moment, when everyone's like agreeing and like, yes, and we're together and there's this amazing team atmosphere, if you get a big high from that, you're in trouble. This is what I've learned, and it's really, it depends on the season of the business, but because I love that. I love community. I love when relationships are really, really healthy. The amount of pleasure I get from that is sort of disproportionate to the way a disagreeable person would feel at that moment. And so yeah, I think your hack is really helpful. I think that a lot of times what I thought you would want to have is a disagreeable second in command. The problem is like they just don't have as much skin in the game unless they're literally like a co-founder. I think that you have to decide if you want to be the ultimate decision maker. And I think that there's probably a point in the business's life where you want to pull yourself out of that seat and you want to step down. If you're really, really agreeable.
Is another scenario, I'm thinking of like Abraham Lincoln in like Team of Rivals. He seems to be actually a pretty agreeable person, and it seems like he injected disagreeableness into his organization by hiring a bunch of people into his cabinet that all would never align together. So unless he denied himself that pop of dopamine of getting everyone on the same page, it's never going to happen. Yeah. And so then the only thing you can do is make difficult decisions, because you're never going to get everyone on the same page. Is that maybe another hack to go around it?
Yeah, that's a good idea. You definitely want to then incite the kind of atmosphere where people are really willing to fight each other. Yes. I mean, because otherwise, if they're all agreeing and you're the one person who has to disagree,
it sucks.
Yeah, you just won't like your life, and then you will. Again, I think that the thing that I'm really worried about in these situations isn't somebody consciously giving in when they're like, I know this is best for the business, but let's go and do this instead.
Right.
What I'm really worried about is them not knowing that they're being agreeable. Like, I think it's that they actually believe, no, this is best for the business. We've all decided. I mean, I took a vote. We all wanted it. I really wanted it. I got excited about it. They're excited about it. And then you wake up 3 months later and you're like, that was a bad decision. Yep. And it happens again and again and again. And I think that's usually a signal. It could be that, what's happening is you want it to be true, and your intuitions are being shifted in real time because you don't want to have to face all of the awkwardness and all the relational and emotional pain of standing up to people over and over again and making hard decisions. And I think, again, there are lots of different people that are wired in different ways. And really what this has caused me to do is, because there's kind of a prototypical disagreeable boss that everyone sort of makes fun of. And I know that there's toxic workplaces and bad bosses, and you don't have to be disagreeable and a bad boss. But I can tell you that I really respect disagreeable people. Like, when I see somebody making hard decisions, again, I hope they're not doing things that are toxic. I think that there's lots of bad, but I think a lot of times there's sort of a trope where, why, I read this all the time. People are like, why are all the mean people in charge? And I'm like, okay, you don't understand how the world works. And this is sort of what this point is about. Yeah. Understand that being disagreeable is actually a part of the job description for a lot of elements of an organization, a lot of stages of a business. And if you're hyper agreeable, man, I have not figured out enough of the hacks to be a great leader in that situation. You have to at some point decide, is this a good situation for me or not?
Invest in people who are where you were 10 years ago.
Yeah. I think it's really important to remember what it was like to be in that situation. You have so much value to give to those people. So you're thinking about where could I invest the most value? And this is kind of a multiplication or exponential impact principle. When you spend time with somebody who is headed where you are, where you're going, but they're 10 years behind, the amount that you can help that person is probably exponentially more impactful than almost anything else you can do. It feels small because you're just having coffee with that person or building that relationship, but man, it's just a huge place to add a ton of value.
It's funny, yeah. And literally, I'm 10 years younger than you.
Yeah.
And I feel like you did that literally about 10 years ago, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
And it gave me a huge amount of value. And a lot of it was not the intentional stuff that you were doing. It was much more maybe able to observe you and your kids, or observe you in your office, or even talking about how you manage your week. There's something about that 10-year gap that I'm like, great, I can just model off of it. It was just you being yourself around me was very beneficial. And I'm beginning to see that too, 10 years back with other folks, especially early founders. It's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, it should be like a source of a lot of fun. It's also a great place to build long-term relationships. I think that similar to when you're really little and you build into somebody who's 5 years younger, it feels like a huge gap. But as you get older, you get more similar. And so like you and I feel like are much more peers now.
Right. And when you're 95 and I'm 85.
That's right, we're not going to care.
We're the same age, yes.
That's right.
Yeah. Number 12 was concentrate wealth to build it, diversify wealth to keep it. Heard that before, but then you said, same goes for time and energy.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Okay, so I think that it's okay to understand that there are two different phases, and this is part of almost where we talked about the family hat and the business hat. A lot of times when you're trying to escape, sort of like middle class, for example, which I think is something that you should actually try to escape. You should get to a place in your life, and that thing is one of the things that entrepreneurs can do.
Hopefully escape up, not
that's
down.
That's right, yeah, where you're like, where you are. And what the reason for that is, Stephen Covey has that quadrant, idea where you want to live your life working. He's got, there's urgent and not urgent, important and not important. And most people spend their time focusing on urgent, important, or, and they're just stuck in that spot. But he basically said a peaceful life is when you suddenly can work almost all of your time on not urgent, important in that quadrant. And so when you're in the concentration phase, your time, your energy, and your resources are all concentrating trying to escape, the paycheck to paycheck kind of world that most of us start in. You are concentrating so much of your time in that urgent and important quadrant, and that's okay. There's a season for that, but the goal is to ultimately have the time where you can start to diversify so that you can spend time in the important but not urgent part of your life. That's really where I just see as the seed of wisdom, where you can actually, from a much bigger picture perspective, figure out where do I add the most value, how do I invest a lot of my time and energy in the things that really will maximize the value that I have in that I have as my skills, my relationships. So it's just important to think about these as two phases. When you're still trying to escape, that kind of place, then you need to concentrate. It is okay to double down. It sounds really weird to say I'm throwing all of my chips into this one basket. But oftentimes what happens to entrepreneurs is they have that epiphany and they do that. Then they when they start to have the opportunity to pull back and diversify, they don't know how to do that. They don't understand these are two different seasons of the game, and that it's important to know that it's double down. You have very little to lose when you have very little. But man, when you start to have more, if you're going for exits or you're trying to take distributions in a bootstrap business, you've got to have a good strategy to diversify so that you can again move that time and energy from the concentrated, urgent, important to that much more diversified, important but not urgent quadrant.
When you can't get out of your mind, get into your body.
Yes. So when you're leading, and what you're doing essentially when you're leading, oftentimes is you're sort of encapsulating problems that are spinning in your head. And what happens oftentimes with a business leader is it's like the plate spinning, and you've got 20 problems spinning in your head. And when things start to struggle and you start to get overwhelmed, this can really start to affect you emotionally. And one of the things I was totally blown away by was that when you exercise, oftentimes you get even 30 seconds of complete peace, and that's enough to sort of reset your whole system. Like that's how I experience it. So when I was in the middle of my workday, one of the things I decided to do was during lunchtime just go and work out for 30 minutes. And what I experienced was after about 15 minutes of working out, 20 minutes, I would enter into this 1 minute of sort of the nirvana, just where I couldn't think about anything else but like, lifting that weight or doing something. And it just required all of my concentration. And the minute something required all of my concentration, it felt like everything, like somebody just hit a giant reset button. And I was suddenly, like, I saw things from a different perspective. And after that, just a different kind of energy sort of flooded into me. And that was super useful. So if you find that you've got these problems spinning in your head and they're just going for day after day after day after day, and you're not getting any of those moments of total quiet and peace, then one just easy hack is to get into your body. And when you're fully in your body, it'll turn it off. And it's just worth doing that. It'll do something to you, and it's valuable for the business. It's not like just a extra thing.
It's not indulgent.
No, yes. It's not at all. Your company needs you to do this.
It's a common pattern. If you look at most successful executives have really regimented workout regimes of some sort. For me, I think cardio and skill oriented, like I like board sports, get me there more than weightlifting. Weightlifting I like a lot, and it's a better release for me of frustration. Like weightlifting, when you feel like your eyes bulging out as you're trying to squat something, that feels good. Yeah. But for that sort of ordering, I think specifically the jostling nature, I've heard actually the jostling nature of running can literally jostle your thoughts in order. Yeah. And I feel that thing happening. Yes. It's like defragmentation or something.
Right. Yeah. And I think like I was never able to really be consistent working out when it was in the category of staying healthy, for whatever reason. When I got into this category, I got very consistent because I just felt like I had so much more energy for my life, for the problems I was trying to solve. And so if you've tried this before because you're like, I'm gonna like New Year's resolution, I'm gonna get healthy, put it in this category and it might change everything. And for me, it really helped putting it in the middle of the day because it actually created the most value for that time. It was better for me to get up early in the morning and just focus on work and then work out at 1 p.m. than it was for me to work out early. Now a lot of people don't experience it that way. They enjoy morning workouts, but that's kind of how it worked for me.
That's great. Cultivate a team of advisors that both you and your co-founders trust.
Yeah. So you're going to have disagreements, and lots of the disagreements you're going to have with co-founders are going to be about things you don't know. And that's where the real danger is. That's where you start to wear each other out relationally. And anytime you don't know what you don't know, then the solution is to find somebody with experience. And so if you need to cultivate those relationships in advance of those problems, you're going to know that
right. If you're
some percentage.
Introducing yourself with a problem, it's a lot harder.
Yes. Yeah. So you basically want to have people that, and you can imagine, it's so much, and I think it's really good to think about relationships as something you can wear out. Like that is a really helpful framework. You're going to need to fight in relationships. You're going to have hard conversations, but those aren't really the problem. The problem is wearing each other out. There's a moment where one of you says, this is not worth it. That's the problem. And so if you're having those kinds of conversations, have them with advisors. Like say, we could go for another 12 rounds. There's a huge cost to that because one of us might tap out, and that's terrible for the business. And there's a time for that. Even when you do that, you want to do that because you're tapping out around something that you both understand, not something you don't understand. And there were so many times where I would be having struggles relationally with one of my co-founders, and if I talked to an advisor, they would actually bring up a tool or an idea I'd never heard of. And I thought this was just an intractable problem. Like, oh yeah, we'll never get along. This is just it. Like, this is just the way it works forever. And somebody will say, well, have you thought about this? Again, the unknown unknowns are that's what kills you. And that's what wears out relationships, because you just start to go over the same ground and you're not making any progress and you lose hope for the relationship. So if you have a few of those and you can have those conversations, and what you're looking for in those advisors are people with those insights that have enough experience to go, oh, this is what you guys are struggling with. And if you both hear it and you both respect it, then you can get past that issue and not wear out that relationship.
Was there any formality to which you do that, or that you found beneficial, like having an advisor board, or is it more just having relationships that you can pull people in?
Yeah, I mean, we did both. Some formality. So we had a board of advisors, the board of directors, and we had sort of informal advisors. And those we really invested in more and more as time went on. We didn't have a lot of that to begin with, unfortunately. I think it would have probably helped us a lot. So I would say you want all three. You want to have, so we did a quarterly board of advisors, and what we thought about a lot there was just having lots of people from different basically industry expertise, somebody who was really in our industry. Then we had people that were more on the legal side, somebody who was on the accounting side, and then people with just experience.
I was one of the randos
yes.
for a while. Yeah.
I love those conversations, and you come into those quarterly meetings and you just talk about your most intractable problems. And then the real blessing of those relationships too is that now you've got 4 or 5 people who are at least caught up enough on the business that you can call them. And you were really good at this. I always, for some reason, my intuition was always that I know the realm of what I'm talking about, and so the unknown unknowns was not something that it just always felt weird. It always surprised me when that was the issue. But I think for you were very aggressive about like, hey, like I have a problem. I need to talk to somebody with more experience. I think that's really helpful. And I think that in particular to protect relationships with co-founders, it's a big deal.
Number 15, you said men are pack animals, but few know it. Mm-hmm. And you referenced your use of masterminds. Talk about that.
Yeah. So pack animals mean like wolf packs. And I don't know how this applies to women, so I'm just going to talk about it from the male perspective. because this is what surprises me. Maybe women are more self-aware. I think that there was a study that said that you make the average of your 3 closest relationships or something, or 5 closest friends, in terms of income. And man, that is so true. I couldn't like unhear that, and now I'm looking around, I'm like, this is just so incredibly true. But at least for me, this was not intuitive. I felt very independent from what other people's expectation, but I do think that we're all somehow wired this way, which means you need to be cultivating relationships with people at your level, whatever your level is. Masterminds kind of exist in order for people that are at similar levels to be building relationships with each other. And sometimes you can be like so focused on your business that you're like, okay, this is where I need to be, and my friends are my coworkers, and you may be ignoring the fact that if you can pull yourself out and get into a body of peers, this is going to help you level up a lot, and that you're psychologically designed to really kind of judge and kind of consider, am I off base? Is this normal? Is this not normal? By constantly calibrating against other relationships in your life. And if everyone you know is sort of downstream from you in lots of areas, then you're going to be calibrating downstream, and you don't want to be calibrating downhill. You need to be calibrating to people that are constantly going to push you to go one step up.
You said develop diet, exercise, and sleep rhythms that maximize mental and physical energy.
Yeah.
This is a big one for you.
Yes. Yeah. So I really believe in sort of treating yourself like like you're in a laboratory, and you're constantly iterating on yourself, from the diet perspective, from the sleep, or anything physical, your exercise. And what I just am constantly trying to figure out is how is this impacting my energy? And for me, that's always been the most constrained resource that I have. Some people, it's more time and other areas. But that, just really studying, when I eat that food, I feel great. When I eat breakfast, I feel sluggish afterwards. Like, do not go on autopilot when it comes to these things. These things are daily, and they're going to impact you constantly. And so if you want to be at peak performance, you need to treat yourself like you're a actual biological being, and you have to listen to your body and constantly iterate on how to improve in these areas. It's because you don't want to be taken down because of physical stuff. That's a big risk for the business, big risk for you personally. You want to see that sort of go up and to the right with everything else. And the only way I know to do that is just be listening and iterating. Listen to books and to podcasts about diet, exercise, and try to really become a student of, okay, I'm going to try that. I'm going to change my diet in this way. And again, you're constantly thinking, how can I improve my energy?
Have you noticed that certain people laugh at this?
Oh, do they really?
Have you not noticed this?
I mean, I know people blow it off, but
I'm like an evangelist on this topic, actually on all topics. And so I like to tell people, this is what I'm trying right now. Yeah. And I've noticed that people laugh. They're like, oh, you're always trying something new. Have you ever noticed that? Or I bet your kids probably make fun of you.
Yeah. I think people that aren't trying to basically completely maximize their life, or aren't in that kind of max out kind of world, it seems unnecessary. And and I think for some of them it is. I mean, they just have excess. Like, they don't know what to do with some of their time. They don't know what to do with some of their energy. They don't need to focus it. There's not a huge cost to being kind of in a low performance state physically. But if you're in a startup, or you are leading a business and trying to manage things, there's a huge cost. And so I think that's when you start to notice, this is no laughing matter. This is very serious.
That maps to your next one, which is find your flat out limit and then back away.
Yeah. I think it's really helpful to know at some point in your life what it looks like when you are going, you're basically, the RPMs are all the way red. Because nobody knows where that spot is for them. Some people are incredibly high capacity. They can work 80, 90 hours a week and be at a very peak level, and it doesn't degrade, right? Other people are not wired that way. And first of all, I think to do this, you don't idolize people that are workaholics or are sort of machines. I am definitely not. But it's very difficult to know where that line is. And you think because okay, I kind of get tired at this point, or I start to make kind of weird decisions at this point, or whatever. But you don't really know. And this kind of goes back to the early point. Well, what if you changed a few variables? What if you worked out right there? What if you actually got an extra hour of sleep? Or, what if your diet shifted? Or what if you actually swapped when you had meetings, instead of having meetings first thing in the morning, do them in the afternoon? Like, I kept playing with things and finding that I could keep growing my capacity, keep growing my capacity. And so where I found my limit was about 3 times the efficiency of what I would normally do. So I could, in terms of like meetings, writing, output, creative output, relational output, my flat out limit was about at the 3x mark of what I would have normally thought. And then I started to go, okay,
then you got brutally ill.
Yeah. Then you're about to die. And then you start backing away from that point and figure out, okay, what does sustainability look like? And is this just unhealthy? But I think that the point it's trying to solve is to assume that 1x was your actual top limit for your productivity. And so you want to find your maximum of productivity. And this assumes high quality as well. You want to be definitely looking at that. And so if you're doing that, I think that it's good to I would have a conversation with my family and say, guys, we're in harvest time. I'm just going to work flat out, and I want to kind of figure out where I can hit. And these are some non-negotiables, in our rhythm. Like, I kept the Sabbath and those kinds of things. But I really want to. I need to work hard right now. And once you find that limit, it's just really helpful to know. Okay, I can hit that. I can get into that gear. Some people have they think they're a 2-speed car or something. Most of us are 10 speeds, and we just have never gotten past 4 or 5. And so I think that it really can boost your confidence too, to know, oh, I have another gear I didn't know I had. Those are some of the reasons why I think it's really valuable.
And so part of that is discovering when you have peak creative energy during the day,
Yeah.
and then design the rest of your day around that.
Yeah.
When did you discover that? And when is that for you?
For me, it's about 30 minutes after I wake up. So I can have, and this is true, people tend to be in one of 2 categories. They either, their peak tends to be 30 minutes after they wake up for the first 2 or 3 hours, or really late at night. Those are kind of, most people are morning, but some people are something happens at 11 p.m. and they just come alive. I think that when you're a leader and you're not just punching a clock or going through the motions, you're making hard decisions, you're writing policies, you're inventing new products, whatever you're doing that's really creative, man, that is such high value activity that I never want to touch any of that kind of work at 3 p.m. It will be worse, and it might be in a checklist somewhere, and it might feel like I need to get it done. But if I do it from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., it'll be multiple times more higher quality. And so I am very, very protective of that time. I know that that's the time where I'm going to produce the most valuable things. And so I design my rhythm around making sure that, 30 minutes after I wake up, I'm sitting in front of my computer, and I'm writing, and I'm thinking. Writing to me is synonymous with thinking. And so I am working out whatever the problem is. I'm figuring out how to push through this creative project. And I do all my hardest work in those 2 hours. And I think about it as I want to get a day's work done in 2 hours. In other words, if I just had that 2 hours and the output that I had during that 2 hours, I would at least say, wow, that I did some really valuable, I did the hardest things that I needed to get done, and I did them well. Now I go into meetings and emails, and all that stuff can happen after that. But to me, that's all kind of icing on the cake at that point. And that's a very entrepreneurial way to, I think, view your time. That some people, it's, their day is 12 hours of meetings. But if you're creating something, then you probably need to do creative work. And so whatever that looks like, the deep thinking work, the deep work, like Cal Newport talks about, you got to protect that time and design around it.
Talk about, this is a bit of a shift now to number 19, make a habit of surprising your co-founders and board with information they think you downplay or hide.
Yes.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah, so one of the things that you're constantly trying to earn with your board or with your co-founders is trust. And I learned this the hard way, and I think most people do. You're not trying to lie to them, but there is such pressure to spin the story positively. And I just discovered there's a really simple solution to this problem. And that is to actually put into your framework of your thinking in those relationships, I want to surprise them with bad news. I want to aggressively communicate things that they don't want to hear. What happens in those moments is you earn tremendous trust. They might get mad at you. This is going back to the agreeable. I think the reason why I would be like, oh, this isn't so bad, and I think if I massage it this way, it won't look so bad. A lot of it was just to protect relationships. You're just basically putting off a major issue that's going to be in the future. So there's this, moment in The Godfather where I think Tom Hagen, when he gets bad news from that movie executive, he's like, I got to deliver this, straight to The Godfather. He insists on knowing bad information immediately. I got to get on a plane. There's something so important about that when it comes to people that have responsibility. People that have fiduciary responsibility with you as a board of directors or as a co-founder. And so if you know things like, oh, we just learned something bad, it doesn't mean that you're constantly, showering them with irrelevant bad information. It's really, to me, this is when it happens. When you're sitting down, working on your metrics, working on the presentation for your board, when you're thinking about it and you start to sense that that's happening, like I really want to put a better spin on this, stop yourself and say, okay, how do I deliver this straight? And then you want to deliver that first, and then you can talk about the optimism that you have, but you don't want to shield them from bad information. Again, what happens inevitably is 6 months, 12 months, there's a subtle thing that starts to happen, which is that when people are getting information from you as the CEO, they start to realize that the information you're giving them just doesn't correspond well with reality. And they don't know exactly why, but they just don't trust you as much. And it starts to erode those relationships. And it erodes your sense of integrity. And it's just not worth it. It's better to have those people on your team working with you to solve hard problems than trying to make them feel good about what you did, how you delivered, sort of, and how you spun the story.
It's different though, because that's not typically how you get promoted.
Right.
Right, and so it's actually a shift.
That's
if you
right.
think about, you climb to a certain level based on people's impression of you.
That's right.
Because you have to make these decisions quickly as managers.
Yeah.
And suddenly you get to the top and you're like, okay, no more trying to look good. Now
That's
I just
right.
got to show actual
Facts.
truth as much as possible.
The data matters.
Yes.
You have to be really relentless about finding the right data and delivering that to the people, because they have responsibility with you. I think that's part of the shift for me was in relationships, like you said, in employment or even in relationships. Who knows what data is the most important? You're talking to somebody and you're always dressing up and trying to make yourself look, a little bit better. And there's really not a huge cost to that. And so there's not a lot of places in life that are like being in a fiduciary role with other people. And it took me years to figure out this is a totally different category. They deserve the facts. They need the truth, whatever little spins or whatever you're trying to do to try to,
it's not as important.
That's not the place for that. Yeah.
That's really good. Okay, so one of those I'm sure has to do with number 20, which is ignore lagging indicators and obsess on leading indicators.
Yeah. So when you're designing, a huge part of what you're trying to do in a business from a management and metrics perspective is really attune your intuition to where the company is going. So you have to separate those lagging indicators, which are often vanity metrics, things that you're like, oh, that was great, that says something good.
What's an example of a lagging indicator versus a leading?
Yeah, so lagging indicators might be even like, how much cash we have, or figuring out what the current sales are. For our company, one of the most leading indicators was bookings, or even the step before that was like
pipeline.
interested. Yeah, the pipeline. Like constantly thinking about how do I predict where we're going to be in 3-6 months based on these indicators. And so if you're emotionally tied to lagging indicators, you're going to really hurt your business, because your intuition is going to get really messed up. You're not going to know. You need to see a problem 6 months in advance. That's your job. And so you have to figure out what are those metrics that are going to give you those leading indicators, and then feed into those. And so what this does is creates this weird disequilibrium with a lot of people on your team, because if they're thinking about lagging indicators, they may be like celebrating where you guys we're in big trouble. Like, look at this is a leading indicator.
Like a profit.
That's
yes.
right.
Yeah.
And then vice versa, they might be like depressed, and you're like, this is amazing. Like, I can see where we're going to be in 3 to 6 months. It's going to be amazing. So I think it's just really, pointing yourself at those leading indicators is really a critical part of the job.
Talk about number 21. You said develop a daily intuition around cash.
Yeah. And this is maybe part of the bootstrap mentality, but I think also it matters in general, is that you need to be able to smell death. You need to be able to sense it. Your runway needs to feel like something in your gut. Like you can feel it eroding when you're in a salary negotiation. That's what's happening, is you're like, we don't have the money. Like, I have got to negotiate on behalf of this cash balance, because that's our lifeline to get to the next stage or to survive or whatever. So I found myself just like investing in that intuition. It's not often, but sometimes I had one leader in particular that just had no intuition for cash. And so the way that he would spend money and think about the business was just completely out of whack from reality. And I've noticed that since then, and I've just seen there are some people who have developed an intuition for the cash position of their business. They just see this as lifeblood, and they know how to hold on to it, how to like elongate it, how to really figure out how to make sure that their company doesn't risk ruin or crash at the end of that runway. And if you don't have that, you have to develop that. So and that's different than the leading indicators. The leading indicators are really telling you how your business is going to do. The cash intuition is, are we going to survive? It's a survival instinct.
Downside.
That's
yes.
right.
Yeah, that's really good. I actually wondered, because we're not great as humans to comprehend numbers. I actually thought, what would it look like to have like some sort of physical representation in the center of an office? I remember thinking, I wish there was like some sort of even stacks of blocks or something, so I could know, we just took away a block or we put on a block. I wonder if anybody's done anything like that.
Yeah. And usually you're looking at a business and you see lots of different, this is how much cash we have. These are some of our leading indicators that are, happening. This is what's going on with this is when payroll comes out. You're seeing all these things. This is, if you're going to do a raise, this is our next raise, or, whatever the situation is, you have all those, and then you get a sense. You see all those and you get a sense. So I just do that once a day, every time I see it. It just took me about 5 seconds. But over the course of months, I got a really strong sense. Like, okay, I'm looking at the pipeline, I feel like I can put that aside.
Right.
Yeah, you don't want to obsess on it. You want to be able to say, we're fine. We're going to make it. Like, we're going to put that aside.
So you had like a dashboard you look at. Was it daily?
Yes. Yeah. So on Grow, Grow, we used a dashboard on there that had our cash position, everything that would really relevantly impact that, And so I got really used to just looking at that once a day, getting an intuitive sense. And I just discovered, my gut would do things, and I would pay attention to it. Like, ooh, this feels weird. Like I've seen these dips, and that dip, that was unusual. What's going on there?
That's really good. I loved number 22. It's not entirely true, but if you assume every problem is your fault, you'll grow 10 times faster.
Yes. Yeah, and I know this is kind of the Jocko Willink extreme ownership. He did a great job, but I think the way I would say it is a little different, which is that you have to. It's actually a choice. that you get to pick when something's going wrong. Is this my fault or not? And if you actually parse it out, you'll discover that it wasn't all your fault. It's probably, maybe it was 70% your fault or 30% your fault. Doing that calculation to give yourself a sense of like kind of salving that wound feels good emotionally. So but you're losing out on something I think that's far more important, and that is that the growth that could come from just assuming it's 100% your fault. And so that's emotionally hard on you. It was very emotionally hard on me. But over time, I just discovered I should just assume, if I just said that to myself, this is 100% my fault. This is 100% my fault. Like I said, it wasn't always true. If I wanted to parse it out, if I was in court or something, I would probably be able to make a good case that, okay, I'm X percent. But in a business, who cares? You're the leader, you're the CEO. Doesn't matter. Like if you assumed it was 100% your fault, you're just going to grow like crazy. You're going to find the problems. You're going to take responsibility for things, and you're going to not give in to self-pity. That's a really big deal if you're going to do this. You can't be the kind of person who's just going to wallow in self-pity. Your instinct for it's all my fault needs to be, and I'm going to fix it. I'm going to jump in and figure out what's going on. But if you do that, you'll grow. And you'll start to grow in all kinds of areas that otherwise you wouldn't grow in. So it's just a decision you could just make once for all. I'm just going to assume when you bring bad news to me, whoever you are, whatever's going on, oh, that was a bad hire and it was, 2 layers down the organization, that was my fault. I'm just going to constantly think that way, and you'll grow much faster.
Do you do this in your family?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's a discipline I try to do. It helps a lot. Like April can say to me anything from like the kitchen's a mess, to there's an attitude issue with one of our kids. Anything that happens in the family, I just assume, it's 100% my fault. And I can have the resources to work with, my family to like fix it, but passing the buck or figuring out who's to blame is just not useful. I don't, whatever you get from that, it's not nearly as powerful as the learning experience of just internalizing those things as something that you can fix.
Does that rob other people in the organization of something, do you think?
Well, I don't think that you should necessarily communicate it.
Got it.
I think it's something that you say to yourself. It would be in their best interest to think the same thing if it's kind of in their downstream of influence. So it's much more of something that, you just want to say, okay, I'm not going to sit here and parse out whose fault. Now, when it comes to holding people accountable or whatever, sure, you can say that, like, what were you thinking? But that's part of you saying it was your fault. Like, my job is to hold you accountable. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So you have to fixate on what you can do, and that's what helps you do that. Is to say, what of this could I have influenced? Let me assume that that's why this happened. So I'm going to dive in and influence that better next time.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Also, I assume that means that you take 100% credit for
everything. That's right, yeah. That's right. You want to take 100% of the blame, and you want to give away 100% of the credit.
What a job. What a job. Yeah.
People will definitely, you'll get whatever credit's coming to you. I think that it's always a good idea to spread that around as aggressively as you can.
Yeah, that you didn't mention that one, but I've heard you talk about that before, of like the CEO is a bit of a glorious job, and so it's actually your job to shine the spotlight. When you get attention, to redirect the spotlight to the people on the team. People
love that, and it's so good because they're vulnerable to being overlooked. You're not. Like at the end of the day, you're going to get a disproportionate amount of credit, no matter how this ends, for anything that's good that happen. But they're not going to get that. So, anytime you can, point that flashlight or the spotlight on them.
Yeah. Number 23, if you value your marriage, find ways for your spouse to regularly interact with your coworkers of the opposite sex and talk about them together.
Yes.
Never say to your spouse, trust me, when it comes to relationships. Instead, say, don't ever trust me.
Yes. So when you are in a work setting, you are on a team working with, probably members of the opposite sex for a lot of hours, day after day, week after week, month after month, potentially year after year. That is a very vulnerable place to be. if you're in a marriage that you want to last. If your wife's not there, your husband's not in that workplace, you need to find ways to protect yourself and to protect that marriage. There's a really simple way to do it. Those are the kind of two suggestions I would have. One is make sure that your spouse knows your coworkers well and that he or she has an actual eye for this. So like I want April to like see any women that I'm working with and to ask herself, is there any reason, not from how Jeremy is acting, but just even in the way this relationship is likely to play out, knowing what I know about him, knowing now what I know about her, that this could be an issue at some point in the future. Again, week after week, month after month, year after year. So that's the first thing, is just let him or her investigate and invite them to do that. Find ways for them to do that. Have them in the office, have them having conversations, whatever things you can do to help them see they know the names, the families, like what's going on in the lives of the people that you're working closely with. And then the second thing is you've got to avoid this trust conversation about saying, just trust me. Like, I am very vulnerable. And I think every single person that's in that state is in a very vulnerable situation. And in that situation,
historically, we see that. This is very
just
common.
don't trust. And so I think as the person that's in that situation, you need to do the opposite of saying, just trust me. You need to say, please don't ever trust me. Like, in other words, ask me questions. I will not be offended. Like, if, it always starts with you having some kind of interaction with a member of the opposite sex where you felt, a little bit appreciated, just like, oh, like they see me. They see a part of me that share that. Like, say that to your spouse. Hey, this person, we were having lunch, a group of us, and, she said this really nice thing to me. And I was like, wow, that felt really good. Like, I would say that, to April. That was a signal to watch out. Like it's like I have just developed an emotional bond with this woman. It's tiny. I receive something. I want this relationship to be good with my coworkers, and I want my marriage to last a lifetime. And these things are absolutely at tension. And we're not being honest about how challenging this is. And so, to watch friends of mine who have gotten into trouble in these areas, a lot of times the safeguards weren't there. And so these are two safeguards that we had developed that I would just recommend that people have. If they intend to keep their marriage for life, it's not going to be easy.
Did that freak out April at all?
She would react all the time, to any of those, like, in a good way. Like, I want her to react.
Well, that's the point, I guess.
Right,
You
exactly.
actually were hoping for that, yeah.
Yeah, she's like, wow, like, and then she'd ask me about it. And then she would come into work, because I would say, come in, and then she would get to know them better. And then she would sort of see the relationship, and she'd watch the interactions, and we talk about it. And it was just a very open part. And then there were times where it was like, wow, I'm going to like start to close off any kind of emotion. My emotional connection with this person needs to be dialed, all the way down potentially. Even before, again, there was never a situation in which I feel like I was close to anything, where I was even entertaining anything. But that's kind of where you want to stay. Like, the barrier between just getting a little bit of, emotional gratification in this relationship and for it to sort of take inevitable steps down these paths. And I know this is controversial for some people.
Yeah.
This all from me comes from, like, I am absolutely committed to my marriage.
That's important.
And I want to be a good business owner. And we have to be more realistic about how much tension there is there.
So being realistic, does that have an adverse effect on women in your organization, if we could, in terms of their career development?
Yeah.
And how do you process that? Because honestly, in our last organization, we had there was like a 10-to-1 ratio of women to men on my team for a while, and so it's like I have to. What am I supposed to do with that?
Yeah.
Right? I'm
These safeguards really are to protect that. I think you owe it to the women who work with you that you don't negatively impact their work relationships and don't negatively impact their career paths. And so the question is, how do you do that? How do you protect all these things at once? And that's where our solution was my wife had to engage. So as long as she was there, like, I don't need to have a growing affectionate, emotional relationship with any man or woman in my workplace for them to grow in their career. And so, in fact, of course, if you start to develop, favorites or, go past that into some kind of romantic relationship, it's likely to have a negative impact
even
on them.
Friendship on that level from
Right.
a non-romantic friendship can actually have an adverse effect on the rest of the organization.
Yeah. And then if something were to happen in terms of like my wife feeling very confident and comfortable with this relationship, and she's more and more integrated into it. And I know this takes a lot of time, and for a lot of people this would not be realistic. But again, it comes down to how big of an issue do you think this is? For some people, this is just not a big thing. They don't think this is a big problem. And I have, both my parents and April's parents celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. And when we got around and celebrated 50 years, what we were celebrating was, oh my goodness, you guys, what you went through to stay faithful to each other for 50 years and what you provided our family in that faithfulness is something that to me, I am so grateful for, and I want to make sure that is preserved and that our generation, does that as well. And I just want to be realistic about how challenging this is and that those trade-offs are real. I'm not saying that there's never a situation where this couldn't cause you to say, wow, I have to make some work changes because this is, and that's a real problem. You bring it up to your board, you talk about it openly. You're like, I just don't, this is a trade-off. I don't know how to make this decision on behalf of the organization, but I'll tell you, because of my commitment here, there's got to be a change. And if I have the power to make that decision, this is how I'm going to make it. And I need your help, to walk me through this. How do I do this in a way that's, upright, that honors my coworkers, that's legal? But I think right now what we're saying is work, your marriage is in one bucket, work is another bucket, and it's your job to just endlessly assume that there can't be any kind of tension that can't be managed interpersonally. And I think that that's unrealistic.
Yeah, it's the conversation we don't want to have, and so therefore we'll just act like it's not a problem.
That's right.
Yeah. That's great. You said next was a number of employees is a dangerous vanity metric.
And this could be personal for me. It's hard to like, you probably have some go-to metric that lets people know that you're a big deal, For
What
me,
was the number for you? What was your number?
Well, when we hit like 50 employees, we were like past that 50, then it felt like, whoa, this is like serious. Because then when I tell people, I own a video production studio, I knew they probably thought that I had a camera and I was running around.
In the basement sitting there. Yeah,
right, which is great, but that's not obviously where we were at. And so I used...
That was the signal you used.
That's right. I would say, well, we've got 50 employees. Now, there's a problem that I began to learn about any vanity metric. Anything that you use to sort of signal to people. And again, it wasn't necessarily just saying I'm a big deal. Sometimes there's a legitimate, like, I need to communicate to you the kind of company or the kind of leader, the position I'm in.
Even to win business, you might say, look,
exactly.
we have 50 employees.
Yeah, but I think that all the good reasons, they have sort of like, they cut both ways. I guess I would say, and so for us in this day and age, man, having a large employee base, that was one of the biggest sort of survival threats to the business. And so to feel good about how many people you're employing while you're managing potentially the biggest risk to your business, that was a tension took me a while to wake up to. And I would just say that's sort of a principle, that anytime you're excited about a metric, if it becomes less valuable, or it's only valuable in a very specific context, and it starts to slosh around into other contexts, it can affect your decision making. And I think that probably happened to me, and I don't feel like that's something that was obvious. And so anytime you say something out loud and you feel good, like, oh, they got it, now I feel good, like that is where you have to say, okay, I got to constrain that. Like there's a context for that comment or that metric, but if it gets sloshy because that dopamine hit is just really convenient, then that can really affect your decision making.
Money raised is another big one.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So you maybe raise too much, or just starts to affect how you think about it.
You only get in the newspaper when you close a round, and so then you're like, I guess I got to just start raising more money. So then you start optimizing toward money raised, which is a short-term benefit and a long-term liability.
Yes. Yeah, it's a good example.
You said deep employee relationships cut both ways.
Yeah. Man, this is a hard one for me. I don't think I've got all the wisdom to understand how to think about this, but for sure, like I realized that I approached every one of my employee relationships as if it was a lifetime relationship. Like I assumed like we're gonna be talking to each other's grandkids. There's something in me that and this might be that agreeable part of me, and I think so that was one part, is just for me managing my own emotions when it came to employee relationships was really hard. And I would say as well, probably the other tricky thing is we did a lot to sort of cultivate a culture where our employees were friends with each other. We wanted to, like, whether it was meals or activities or events, or just even saying to our employees, like, talk about deep things. And like, we did so much to try to make our workplace a place of relational depth. And I would say now that there were so many times, I just have to admit, that it backfired on me. That
hurt.
Yes, that it hurt the business. That those employee, because what happens, of course, is that, and this happened multiple times, you'd have one person who decides they just think our business is, doing something wrong, and injuring people because we didn't offer this benefit or whatever, and the speed that a toxic person the amount of, they would travel along the very lines of relationships that we worked so hard to build. So that's what I'm saying, is that all of those pathways of deep relationships that we built were used, we could use them to sort of say, isn't this a great place to work, and we're all friends and we all get along and we have this great workplace. But also over and over and over again, when somebody decided that they didn't like something that we did or didn't like how they were treated, I would discover it after it had impacted 10, 20 people. I mean, there was a time we were on an offsite, and like the entire company got upset about one very tiny thing, because one person got really upset, and they all kind of they were like a collective empathy network. And I didn't realize that cut both ways as much as it. I just thought of it as such an amazing.
It's only positive.
Yeah, it's mostly positive. It's like, and so now with people doing remote work and like trying to figure out, is how much should we cultivate like lots and lots and lots of deep relationships between our employees. I'm not saying like I got the answer. I just would say that my assumptions were pretty off in terms of this will benefit the business. I would say that it hurt the business way more often than I thought it would, and I don't know how to think about it still. But I would say that's one of the lessons I learned.
But it's not all good, is what you're saying.
I think that's the big thing.
Think of it as a road, right? It can accelerate in one direction and in the other direction.
Yes. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I don't know what you do with that. Yeah. I guess you could try to have a heartless relationship organization and test it out. But that feels like a strange.
Well, I would say that the thing that what I'm wrestling with isn't that we would ever do anything to discourage relationships, but that we did so much to encourage them. That's what I'm wrestling with. Like, we really did a lot. Like, I loved when people would, whatever we could do to say, you guys should be having meals together and getting to know each other. And, we would facilitate the establishment of deep relationships. We did a lot, and we thought a lot about how to do that. And I'm not saying go the other extreme and try to blow up relationship or keep people separated. I'm just saying, I just saw that as just a net good. And I would say it hurt the business over and over again. And in ways that were, I would say, very much, that really were unnecessary. Like, I didn't feel like we were learning or growing. I just felt like it was just somebody that was either misinformed or just did not have a good understanding, or even the business is good at heart using those pathways in negative ways. And you think, oh, well, they're going to see the big picture, and that we try so hard, and that we've developed all of this. And when you're in a business, when you're making hard trade-offs, it's understandable people are going to get disgruntled. And it's you hope that they would treat that appropriately, but that's really asking a lot for a lot of people. And so I would say that was just something that I'm like, man, if I were to do that over again, I would rethink how to think about that. Being super aggressive about having a hyper relational workplace. I'm not sure I would assume that's the best path.
Yeah, I wonder how Tony Hsieh navigates that.
I know.
It'd be interesting to know, wouldn't
I
it?
can't imagine, how much that impacts. And I think part of it is, it's really interesting to hear his story, where he's given himself so completely over to, be an integrated part of. And so I think that at the end of the day, he's constantly, I'm living in this trailer, and this is the last time I don't know where he's at now, but I'm living in this trailer next to all of my employees. I mean, there's a certain extreme you could probably get to where you're willing to take whatever those hits are, because you're such a perfect model of your values. But man, if you're not, and if you're not being that transparent, or you do have this separation between your business life and your family life, and you want to maintain that, then there's lots of room for people to make assumptions. And those assumptions are not always going to be that you're this wonderful person, especially when hard trade-offs are being made, and that it's impacting people.
It's really good. Okay, last one. Remember, your relationship with this company will end. Yeah. Occasionally project yourself into that future reality.
Yeah. Man, I never wanted to do this. This is part of why I wanted to say this, is that if I projected myself into the future, it was, I'm going to own Epipheo 20 years from now. I'm going to own Epipheo 50 years from now. My grandchildren will own Epipheo 100 years from now. Like, that was the future I was constantly projecting myself into. And that really made it hard for me to be objective about this as an asset, and what was even best for my relationship with the business. And and I wish I would have projected myself into an exit future. I think I just would have been smarter, and I wouldn't have gotten, caught up in things that just aren't really realistic and aren't really wise. So I think the root of a lot of my, a lot of the times when I had thoughts about the business that were just unrealistic, overly idealistic, a lot of it came from projecting myself into this endless future where I was, a part of or leading the business, into whatever that looks like. If you can imagine a future where, and a lot of people obviously in certain startups, exit is considered like a great end, and so you're constantly thinking about that, and so there's probably an extreme on the other side where you're projecting yourself too much. I'm just saying, for me, I didn't really think about ever selling the business, and so I wasn't managing the business for a possible exit. I wasn't preparing myself for what that would look like very well, and so I think that would have been to my benefit and to the business's benefit had I done that. So you want to be in that situation where you're projecting yourself into a future that's really on line with what's likely, and it gives you that distance and I think a much more balanced perspective.
Where were you when your relationship with the company did end, and who was there?
I would say probably the moment I went to the bank with my wife, and we were waiting to sign papers because of COVID. We couldn't be in the closing room with the buyers, and so they all came out right before we went in to finalize the papers, and we're hugging them, and and it was like at this really old bank downtown Cincinnati. It felt very much like that was, those signatures represented the end, and I was with her and got to see, and the buyers were very close friends of ours, and so and they were there with their spouses and some of their kids, and so it felt like a really awesome moment just to celebrate. We're so excited for what they're going to do in the future with this business, and feel like in such great hands. And so it was a really fun moment and great handoff.
You realize that in my list of 70 or whatever that kind of started this process, that my last thing was your relationship with your company will end at some time.
Oh, yeah.
And so you have to think about who is it going to be with, where are you going to be, and invest in those things.
Yes, that's what I mean by
and so
like
I feel
project.
like you and I literally, it was like your last one was my last one. Which
wow.
Well, maybe that's your 10-year gap is that you led me down that path or something.
No, that's good.
But it seems like, I mean, you set up a really great life that you did invest in. And maybe so talk a little bit about what you got going on now.
Yeah. So we've got a number of different businesses that are, and all the other things that we're working in really are more integrated with our kids. We've got 5 kids, two adult kids. So my wife owns this sewing studio that's grown really, has an increasingly big presence online with my daughter Kelsey and with her mom, my mother-in-law Julie. And so I do a lot of like just helping out with them on the side. Me and my son Jackson and now my daughter Kelsey are all part of a real estate investment company called Third Generation Properties. And the whole idea is, you can be a part of this if you're investing for your grandchildren. I'm investing for your children, Jackson, Kelsey, all my kids. So we're buying properties and renting them and, thinking out those strategies and finding deals. And it's very easy to do that together. Jackson's, really into construction. Kelsey's really into deal finding. So we're finding just where each person in the family really resonates with whatever kind of roles in that business so that we could just do that together. We've probably the biggest thing we're doing right now, or I'm working on, is family teams. And family teams is really an organization that just trains families to think about becoming a multi-generational team on mission instead of just a bunch of individuals. So I had a profound experience in Israel where I just kind of a light bulb moment for me, where I realized you can choose a different kind of family. And one of the reasons why so many Western families struggle is that they've accidentally been handed an idea of family that it's just a collection of individuals or a springboard to individual success. And you can choose to be a multi-generational team on mission. So we've got that going with our friends, the Bethkeys, and that includes courses and events and lots of online resources and podcasts and things like that. I'm also a director of a nonprofit called 1,000 Houses here in Cincinnati. Mostly we're trying to figure out what it looks like for, and this is primarily within our faith community, like what does it look like for households to really engage in their faith together. It's just kind of really much in an exploration stage, and Blake's on the board of that, so how all the conversations around that. And I got another little side thing, Cincinnati Sprout House, which we grow microgreens. And I do that with my 2 youngest daughters primarily. And so we've got a bunch of subscribers, which are basically people that we drop off. I love growing food. It's just a huge hobby. And so I'm like, we can pay for this hobby and do this together. So that's something we started when COVID hit, and we just were stuck in the house together for forever. So those are some of the things we got going.
Just a little bit.
Yeah,
There's a couple things going on. Yeah. But the through line is, I think, really one of the most powerful through lines in this entire list of lessons was this idea of the locus of the identity.
Yeah.
Which is that you really seem dedicated to having your identity primarily and your identity relationally with your family.
Right.
Right? And so each of those businesses that you just listed off, you also listed off family members who are involved in it.
Yes.
And friends who are involved in it.
Yeah.
And so that makes a lot of sense. You seem to be living deeper into. You've taken these lessons and you're actually implementing them in this next go. So.
Yeah, I think that's what we're trying to do. Definitely feel a huge blessing to be in a position to do that, and I feel like what we did in startup mode really gave us the ability. And so that's not something I would lurch to. I think it's something that you can aspire to. And I think we're now in a season where that makes a lot of sense for us. But I definitely think we need to go through all the startups, all the lessons. It was definitely worth. I would absolutely do it again. It was absolutely worth it. And I think that now the lessons can be applied to things that are a little closer to our heart. And it's exciting. It's an exciting time to be in that mode.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thanks so much for sharing this. I mean, I know that each of these has emotional pain tied to it. And so thank you for hopefully helping some of us jump maybe ahead a couple of these.
Yeah,
this is really, or at least giving us words to identify the pain as we walk down the same
exactly.
path.
So much of it's just articulating what this thing is, and that does take a little bit of experience and a little distance. So
Yes.
it was fun to write that list.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah,
Appreciate
absolutely.
it. Hey, I hope you liked that video. If so, maybe watch another right here. Why not? Also, make sure to hit subscribe down below. Thanks for watching.